Can I get thumbs up? Yeah, good. Cool. All right, thank you guys. My name is Mr. Nunes. I'll be here to present to your 7th grade class. Today we'll be talking about visual narrative. The presentation is titled A Closer Look at the Art of Visual Storytelling. Today I'm actually going to need a narrator. Are there any volunteers? I just need one for about a dozen slides. A dozen? Yeah, it's all written down. Would you like to?
Yeah.
All right, thank you, Frankie. It'll be worth it.
He's gonna go up?
Yeah, you can stand up if you want, or you can sit down. It's just going to be every slide. So I'll just let you know. All right, here, read it.
This is my presentation.
Okay. So I'll give you a cue. Okay, here's our lesson plan today. So our lesson plan, there are the Common Core values listed up there. We have integration of knowledge and ideas. We are going to be integrating visual information into this presentation. There are multiple points through the presentation which connect to our studies that we've been studying for the past year, or this semester rather. So we'll be connecting it to history as well as literature. As we carry on through the presentation, we'll go through origin of visual narrative, a more modern sense of visual narrative, as well as future of narrative. So I want you guys to keep in mind what are the possibilities of what a narrative can look like throughout the presentation. All right, narrator. Just read the word bubbles. That'll be your cue.
The word bubbles?
Yeah, every word bubble.
Alright, well, see you later. Hey there! Are you ready to hear the story? Hey, I'm over here. Your friendly neighborhood Spider-Man speaking. Follow me, and I'll show you everything you need to know about visual narrative.
Alright, as you can see, our narrator is a Brooklyn native. Spider-Man is also a native of visual narrative. You'll see as we go through the presentation how exactly he is a part of visual narrative. Now here we have just a general definition of visual narrative, explaining that it can be it's used for storytelling, and it's a device that can be used across multiple mediums such as video, illustration, graphic, music, voice, and audio, radio, anything that you use to tell a story. That's a platform where visual narrative will take place. Today we'll be looking primarily at illustration type of narrative. Narrator?
That's about it. I hope you enjoyed your presentation.
Alright, thanks guys.
Just kidding. There's much more to learn about when it comes to visual narrative. You aren't getting out of it that easily. But no worries. This is going to be a lot of fun. Let's keep going. Try and keep up.
Try to keep up. Alright, so first we're coming into history, visual narrative through history. Does anyone want to give a shot at that word right there? It's French. Yeah, that's it, yeah. Whatever you just said, I can't say it, so thank you. Alright, these are mainly cave paintings that were found in France, southern region of France. And they are an example of narrative through the Paleolithic period. See right there? Paleolithic. One drawing, later overlaid with a sketch of a deer, was actually reminiscent of a volcano. So these drawings that I have shown here are depicting animals, but there are also volcanoes. How we know this is digital visual narrative is that it's explaining the surrounding ecology of the region, of this ancient region of southern France, as well as geology. So these are things that, as you can see, our species has been relying on for millennia. Narrator?
Lions, tigers, caves. Oh my.
Okay, Watak and Egyptian. This is a little bit further in history than the Paleolithic period, but we do have hieroglyphics. Who here has seen or experienced hieroglyphics before? Okay, a few of you guys. They're found throughout the ancient world, and it's a classic documentation of how we can find a form of illustration and storytelling in our ancient past. These here specifically are from Egypt, and the reason that we can actually read these is due to something that again, some military people from France found in 1799. called the Rosetta Stone. The Rosetta Stone was basically more or less a document on stone that was allowing us to translate from Egyptian hieroglyphics to a direct translation to Greek, the Greek language. So that allowed us to bring to life this lost language or lost visual narratives of the ancient Egyptians.
Okay, I can get used to this. Then again, there is more to see. Later, cool cat.
There is more to see. All right, modern visual narrative. Let's just take you through a couple terms that we use with visual narrative. The first is illustration. Illustration is a decoration, interpretation, or visual explanation of a text, concept, or process. Different ways that these can be used and integrated are in posters, magazines, books, even animations, video games, and films. Lastly, we have comic books and graphic novels. Now, the difference between comic books and graphic novels is that comic books usually tell a story throughout a series. It could be multiple different issues. But graphic novels usually tell the story and wrap it up in about 1 to 2 books, and they're usually much longer and much more complex. The story of Kilroy. Now, Kilroy was a comic book featured during World War II. During World War II, the people who fought, the soldiers, were usually 19, 18, 20 years old. So what the U.S. Army sent to them for readings, over mostly on the European front, were comic books. One comic book in general was called Kilroy. Kilroy was an inspector in the Army. He inspected crates and trucks, anything that was shipped in for the war effort. And when he inspected it, he would write, "Kilroy is here," on everything he inspected. So when the Allied forces went through cities in France and stormed to try to do a little bit of reconnaissance, when everything was good, clear, and good to go for the next crews to come in, they would write on the walls of the city, "Kilroy was here," and draw that little guy right there. That's Kilroy looking over a wall. Now this indicated to the next fleets that were coming through these already reconned cities that everything was safe, everything was, really good in those areas and taken care of. So only Americans would recognize this face, and they'd say, "Kilroy was here. The Americans came through. We're making ground. This was a good thing." So he was one of the first really superheroes in comic books, and he actually saved lives of many civilians and soldiers during World War II.
Thank you, Kilroy. You're one of the greatest comic book heroes there is.
Thank you, Spider-Man. All right, now next we have an example, a more modern example of visual narrative. This is a book called Mouse. Mouse is a critically acclaimed graphic novel by American cartoonist Art Spiegelman. It depicts Spiegelman interviewing his father about his experiences as a Polish Jew and Holocaust survivor. The work employs postmodern techniques and represents Jews as mice, Germans as cats, and Poles as pigs. In 1992, it became the first graphic novel to win a Pulitzer Prize, people. Pulitzer Prize, that's a big deal. So the drawing techniques, or the visual narrative part of Mouse, was different than other graphic novels. Usually graphic novelists and illustrators of graphic novels will draw really big at first so that they can shrink it down to book size and have all that detail in there. Instead of being really scratchy, it looks really clean in the final product. However, Spiegelman actually used a very small book to sketch this out in, like a journal size. Does anyone know what kind of impact that might have to do Mouse in journal size instead of very clean cut? Any thoughts? Why would that impact the audience more than having a clean cut story of World War II and the Holocaust? Yes?
It's supposed to be gritty, it's supposed to be dirty.
It's supposed to be gritty, it's supposed to be real. Spiegelman wanted you to feel like you were actually holding the person's journal who went through the Holocaust, who was a Polish refugee, somebody who was surviving this dark period in Europe. All right, now we get to Spider-Man. In 1962, Stan Lee and Steve Ditko created the comic book superhero named Spider-Man. Why was Spider-Man so famous? Well, Spider-Man also had a alter ego, Peter Parker. That was the man behind the mask. He was just a teenage boy. This is the first comic book that would feature such a powerless young person at the time as an actual superhero instead of a sidekick. Now this made people feel very close to the character. He had, in his normal life, Peter Parker had tons of trouble. He was picked on at school. Thank you. He wasn't really the coolest guy at all. He didn't have parents. He was an orphan. And much of the time, you don't even know where his parents went. So this situation, a lot of people could connect to. And then they also saw that this person could come out of that adversity and become a superhero. Comic books now aren't only printed by grand, huge publishers in New York, but a lot of times they're actually done independently nowadays. So anyone can write their own comic book about themselves or any fictional thing that they want to get across to other people. I'm going to skip ahead one slide real quick, and because I don't know how that slide got in there, don't even worry about it. So I have a question for you guys. Can you think of any new creative ways to tell a story?
Go on, give it a shot. Talking to people around you can also help formulate an idea.
And lastly, I'll just read this. Alright, everybody, I've had a great time learning about visual narrative with you all, but now it's time to hit the streets and make a difference. It's a big world out there, but always remember that your story is important. So write it down, share it with the world, and I'll see you next time.